In the previous part 1 already mentioned how important it is, when determining guide spacing, to take the bending curve and the action of the rod into account. That means the actual way the rod works under load must always be considered. Here I have two rods from different manufacturers. Both of them are described as fast, and I would like to demonstrate here, based on their bending behavior, how differently the term fast is defined by different manufacturers. So this is the first one, and this is the second one. And you can immediately see how differently the label fast can turn out and how little you can actually rely on such descriptions. We just saw that the one mounted in the measuring setup has a tip action, meaning it bends more in the upper section than in the lower section. The other rod, although deflected to the same degree, bends much further down into the lower section and remains comparatively stiffer at the tip. This difference, however, can be clearly defined by using the 15-degree measuring system. With it, the exact power factor can be determined, and from that value the guide spacing can be defined precisely. You can determine how the guides must be distributed in the upper section, depending on the power factor and how that affects the spacing further down the rod. And now we come to the point where we can resolve this entire issue with the 15-degree measuring system. Here you can determine the action precisely. You no longer have to rely on what someone calls parabolic, fast, medium fast, and so on. Here you have real facts. The power factor is then directly incorporated into the guide distribution. The higher the power factor, the more guides are positioned in the upper section. The lower the power factor, the more guides are placed in the lower section and fewer in the upper section, because the action behaves differently and bends further through the blank. And that results in a completely different guide distribution. That is extremely important to know and to consider. Recently my partner from Spain asked me how I actually came up with the idea of creating and presenting this guide spacing calculator. The answer is quite simple. For over 40 years I have been deeply involved with the subject of guide distribution. Naturally, because of the 15-degree measuring method that I introduced into my production process, and have consistently used ever since. After building or repairing a rod, I would manually calculate the optimal guide spacing, especially in the critical tip section. That cost an enormous amount of time. And since I was repeatedly asked which guide spacing would be optimal for which rod, I finally sat down and developed this calculator. It aligns the guide spacing for any rod, regardless of length or action, based on the power factor. You get exactly the number of guides required for a specific rod, and at the same time the correct distribution corresponding to the measured power factor. This calculator is available on Solitip. And because the interest has already become so strong, additional calculators will follow, for example to determine the optimal shooting head weight, based on the power factor and the measurement data, or to calculate the optimal casting weight for spinning rods. All of these calculators will be made available, but that is another topic altogether.